Hey YouTubers, and welcome back to Tony the Technician channel, and today we're going to be going back into the 3rd gen and installing a relay on my push button start. So I'll show you the wiring diagram, pros and cons, and really why we're doing this. So when I had this car, when I first purchased this car, it was a V6, and I started slowly doing things, and when I installed the push button start, I basically just spliced into the ignition wire at the steering column and ran it from the steering column to my push button. So I have a toggle that I have to activate, and then it sends power to the push button. So once I turn my key to the accessory position, so it turns on the electronics and the fuel pump, I then flip this toggle, turn it on, it then sends power to the push button, and I can hit the push button and start it. I wanna say, if I remember correctly, remember this is maybe more than 6 years ago, I wanna say there were a couple times that maybe I hadn't started it in about 2 weeks, and it took a couple extra seconds to get the car started. I wanna say I remember it actually tripping or kicking the switch. Basically, I had to shut it back off and then reattempt it, and then it would start. And then I wanna say I also remember a couple times where I was able to feel the wiring, and the wiring was hot or warm. And that's something I definitely don't want. These are things I think I remember, but I'm not 100% positive. But to be on the safe side, because I've put a lot of time and a lot of my own money into this car, and I would hate for something as simple as a push button start to cause an accident with this car, whether I burn through the switch, damage my starter, worst case scenario, the wiring catch on fire and burn my car to the ground after I've spent this much time and money on the car. So I want to be as safe as possible, and that's why we're going to be going about this. There are plenty of 4-cylinders, V6s, and even V8s out there with push button starts installed on them without a relay, but it is safer to have the relay, and I would like to go the safer route and go about this. So I'm going to share with you how I'm doing it, and I'll show you the wiring diagram of how it's set up basically now to what it will look like with the relay, and then we'll get it installed in the car. And then I will also have a video using the Capri soldering iron to do all the soldering for the relay and everything. So if you guys are interested in a good quality soldering iron, go ahead and check out that video. It should be posted as well around the same time as this video, and I hope you guys enjoy. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So here I've kind of drawn it up, and I'll show you the install and everything. I'm not going to show you soldering and all that. If you guys want to see that, then I'll have the Capri soldering iron tool video posted as well. But for this, we're just going to be looking at installing the relay. I'll show you basically everything that you need, how we're going to go about this. So right now I have power that runs from the battery. Obviously there's the stock wiring that positive from the battery goes to the starter. Then I have power that runs inside the vehicle to my toggle panel. And so this toggle on the left has a positive and negative, and basically it's grounded, and then positive comes in, and when I turn that switch on, it then sends power to the push button, which your push button may have ground, or it may just be positive straight through, that when you push it makes contact. There are various different ones. So I just threw a ground in here so you guys would see there may or may not be a ground. Not all of them do. Some of them are 2 pins, some of them are 3 pins. I want to say all of mine are 3 pins. So like this toggle has a ground, it has a positive coming in, and then you have your basically remote positive going out, since we're running the positive on the 3rd pin that then supplies power to the push button. But that may be confusing. Just know that power comes into this toggle switch, and when I flip it on, it then sends power to the push button. So then when turn that on, I can then push the button, and it then sends power to the solenoid on the starter, the smaller bolt on the starter, and that's what cranks it over. Well, in this case, you tend to have longer wiring, and to keep it safe, you would need to run much larger wiring as to handle the voltage or the amperage, especially the amp draw that the starter is going to be drawing. It's going to have, on a V8, a lot of starters can draw anywhere from 200 to 300 amps. And normally this wiring is probably about, if you're lucky, 12 to 10 gauge. Most likely it's probably like 14 or 16, or, something small. So to safely do it this way, you would need larger wiring, which I don't feel like running large wiring in the area where all of this is. And then with running the normal, let's say 16 gauge wiring, you would have a high voltage drop through that wiring, and then that can definitely cause the overheating of the wiring. And if this wiring gets too hot through here, it can catch on fire. I've definitely seen it happen. So we're going to be installing a relay. With this relay, everything is the same. The power comes into the toggle panel over here. Nothing's going to change with my toggle panel or my switch panel, and that positive is still going to the starter. Basically what we're installing is a relay in between this push button and the starter itself. So with the relay, super simple install. You have a 4-pin here, which is what we'll be using. You got your pin 30, 86, 87, and 85. 85 is going to be ground, simple enough. Pin 30, that is always going to be the positive from your battery or from a distribution block. We're going to be going from a distribution block. I just put it to the battery so you guys would understand. And we're going to have a 20 to 30 amp fuse in line with that. So from my distribution block to pin 30 with a 30 amp fuse. And then 86 will be the wire that comes off that used to go straight to the starter. 86 will come off the push button, go to pin 86 on the relay, and then it comes out 87 and goes to the same location on the solenoid. So basically, you got your power from the battery, your ground, and then your remote positive as far as this one. So when I push that button, it is then going to pass through, and the solenoid is going to switch over, allowing the power to pass through to 87. Basically, all this is doing is telling the relay to activate and send that power from pin 30 through to 87 into the solenoid. So I can keep this relay really close to the starter and just run a larger wire as far as pin 30 and 87, and then 86 and 85 can be smaller. So here you can see pin 30 will be a fused 12 gauge wire from the battery. Pin 87 will be a 12 gauge wire as well from pin 87 to the solenoid. And then pin 86 will be a little bit smaller wiring because it's not necessary to run 12 gauge there. 16 gauge wire from pin 86 to the push button. And then pin 85 will be 16 gauge as well. That runs to ground. Simple enough. So if you guys would like, you guys can kind of pause that. Hopefully this makes sense to you. This may not be exactly what your situation looks like because you may be going straight from your ignition switch, or you may have yours wired up slightly different. Let's say all of yours are just 2 pins on the toggle panel or such. Not a big deal. Hopefully this makes sense to you guys. If you guys have any questions on this, please feel free to drop a comment down below. I'll do my best to explain it to you. And then that, let's go ahead and grab everything we need and start installing this relay. So once you've gathered everything that you need to install your relay, the first thing you're going to want to do is decide where you're going to be mounting your relay. And then after that, you can determine what length of wire. If you do it the same way I am, you will then determine the length of each wire that you need. Because I'm going to be doing soldering, and I'm going to do it all outside of the vehicle, so I'll determine how long my ground needs to be after I've determined where my relay is going to be mounted, how long my power wire needs to be, my switch wire, all of that. Now you may do it differently. You may just go and mount this and then use butt connectors and run your wiring. Pretty simple. But I'm going to be soldering all of my wires, and then we're going to be running nylon braided sleeving and everything. So I'm going to do it all outside of the vehicle. So once I determine where my relay goes, I will then solder all my wiring right here, and then we'll install it in the vehicle and I'll show you. But one thing you want to keep in mind is that you want a good location for your relay, that being close to the switch device you're going to be activating, but in a safe location. So mine being the starter. I don't want to mount it so close to the starter that it's receiving extra heat from the headers or anything like that. So I'm going to be mounting it at the front of the engine bay. It's going to be roughly a little less than 2 feet away from the starter, so still very close. Right by my distribution block as well. So the wiring that runs from the battery or distribution block and goes to the starter will be the 12 gauge wiring, and it will be nice and short. And then the ground and the switched wire, that length doesn't matter nearly as much, just keeping the relay as close to the switch device as possible while keeping it in a safe location. And then here I've just kind of shown you like what color wiring I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be matching this. Keep in mind that not all relay wiring is the same. Your 30 pin might not be red. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what wire is what color. Not all relays have the same wiring color. So just keep that in mind. As long as you know what pin is what color, that's all that matters, as long as you get the pinned wires to the right locations. I will be keeping mine all the same. Red pin 30 will be red, blue for blue, you know, everything will match. So if I get in there, I know exactly what wire does what. Also, you can pick these up for very cheap. I think I got a pack of 5 for like $10 or something like that. These are very nice, very simple. You can put whatever fuse you want in there. This is 12 gauge. But I will actually be running the same thing that I used for my fans, that being a thermal circuit breaker. You can get them rated at 20 amps, 30 amps, 10 amps, 15 amps, whatever you want. I have a few of those, so I'm going to be installing thermal circuit breaker instead of the inline fuse holder. They're a little bit more expensive, but they are nice. They reset themselves. You don't got to worry about fuses or anything like that. So I'll show you everything once it's all soldered together, and then I'll show it to you once it's installed. But I'll go ahead and show you the location where we're going to be mounting the relay. So my starter is located right there behind the header. We're going to be going to that solenoid down there. I'm not sure if you can really see it, but up here behind the headlights, you can see my power distribution block, one of them. A couple relays over here, that's for fan 1 and fan 2. Then there are the thermal circuit breakers right down here, labeled 1 and 2. I'll be installing another one for the starter. So I'll have a third circuit breaker over here. So we're going to be running off of that distribution block, and I'm going to mount the starter relay right on the back side of these fan relays. So it'll be on the left side of this piece right here, and then all the wiring will run to that distribution block, the ground screw right up there, and then simple enough, the wire will run down this and to the starter away from the headers, and then the only other wire that will pass this direction is the one that will go inside to my toggle switch and push button right there. So we have it all wired up, soldered, and all of that. Now it's just simply putting it in the car. So obviously this isn't necessary if you guys are just wanting to quickly and simply do this. The nylon braided sleeving and stuff like that isn't necessary. I'm just trying to make this as nice as possible to match the rest of the other relays and wiring in my car. So I just have some heat shrink up here holding the nylon braided sleeving. This is from Alex Tech. I've ran this, I don't know, for years, and they have different colors and different styles. Like this is just the slip-on. They also have a split loom as well, but it is heat resistant. It's got some pretty good temperature resistance to it. So just like before, this is our pin 30, the red fused wire, and I have the ends. The heat shrink color that you see is what the wire color is. So this is a positive, and then this is my 20 amp circuit breaker, and they just simply have eyelets connecting here instead of using a fuse. That you can just run a fuse. I just prefer to run the circuit breakers. The black here is the ground, or pin 85. Then the long one here, this is my trigger wire, or the one that's going to run inside the vehicle, the white wire. As you can see, the heat shrink, obviously, the heat shrink color coding isn't necessary, it's just something I like to do. And so that is pin 86, which goes to the actual push button inside of the vehicle. And then here we have the blue wire, which is going to be pin 87 to the solenoid on the starter. So simple enough. Now we just have to put it in the engine bay. The long trigger wire is actually going to run, it's going to run with this wiring harness up and then through the firewall down here. And then the starter, or the solenoid wire, will run from the relay across here. I'll run it with this 0 gauge that goes straight down to the starter. The other two wires will just be located here at the distribution block and ground spot. So we got everything done. Hopefully you guys understand what's going on here. So I have the relay mounted over here, and as far as the red wire or pin 30, that is going to run actually over here to the distribution block, and it's ran off of that bottom circuit breaker right there. So it comes from the relay through the circuit breaker and then comes back around into the distribution block. That's where our pin 30 or the red fused 12 gauge wire is. Pin 85, the black wire, goes to the ground point from the relay straight to my ground point where all the other relays are grounded. Pin 87, the blue wire, runs up here to my bigger distribution block directly from the battery, and it runs with the main power coming in, and that's off of the starter. So I actually used some high temp wrap around the wire here. So this is the blue wire. It goes, obviously it's going to the starter, so it's right next to the header. And this Alex Tech braiding, it is good with heat, but not direct heat or heat around 500 degrees. So I wanted to go a little bit extra. This stuff, I'll show you the packaging, but it's good up to 1100 degrees continuous. And then I also have this, it's fed into this higher temp gauge protective sleeve as well. So it's double sleeved and runs straight down to the solenoid on the starter. Here's what I'm running. The black smaller sleeve is from Heat Shield Products. There's the part number. Good, rated up to 1100 degrees continuous. And then the larger one is from DEI. I run this on my headers as well. Well, not this, but DEI. And then this, you can get this either in solid or split. I got the split, so I didn't have to take apart the wiring completely. So it does have Velcro, and you can still cut it. And that is good up to, withstands 500 degrees of direct heat. So either way, with both of these, we're gonna have some good protection on these wires that go directly next to the header. And then the only other wire is the white wire, which then actually runs with the original wiring harness up through here and through the firewall, and then is ran to the actual push button start. So simple enough. Let's go ahead and attempt to not start it, but turn it over. I'm not ready to start it yet. I need to get the old fuel out of it and everything. So we don't have the fuel hooked up, but I'm just going to bump it a couple times just to make sure that it is properly hooked up and that the starter actually engages the flex plate as well, so we don't have any issues there. Here's just kind of a better view of how my system works. So my neutral safety switch is still on my clutch, so I engage that, and then I flip this switch, and the ignition isn't on. I don't need it. This is fuel and all the electronics. There we go. And then of course I still need to finish bolting the rest of this down, but it's good to go. So that's it as far as the install of the push button start relay on my 3rd gen Camaro. It's basically the same setup for almost all vehicles. This is just how I went about it. I wanted to put a relay on it to just be safe about everything. I've put a lot of time and money into this car. So this is a little lengthy video. I know I was a little bit repetitive on the wiring and the color coding, and keep in mind that your relay wiring colors may be different, but just follow your diagram. You know, the pin numbers are to what they go to. Just make sure that's all correct. And I went, you know, some may call it overboard. I call precautious and prepared. You know, I try to color code as much stuff as I can and run the wiring as nicely as I can, and kind of, you know, around the heat, protect the wire and things like that. So just keep those things in mind, and I really hope you guys found this video helpful. I know it was a little bit longer, but I still hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did, please make sure to hit that thumbs up. Leave a comment down below of your guys' thoughts, as well as any questions that you may have or anything like that. And as always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. See you guys next time.